The four-rotor Supra emerged as a byproduct of me getting my dream engine and deciding I wanted to put it in a chassis that I could beat the crap out of and is easily replaceable. Now, the first start of this car was a glorious day. I myself had never even heard of four-rotor, only on YouTube videos before, and to get to hear it in life was something very special. But there's one thing that wasn't quite right. It didn't have that signature high-pitched four-rotor sound like you hear in the 787B, a lot of Mad Mike's cars. People were saying that the engine was built wrong, that there was an issue, and that's why it didn't sound like it should. But we knew exactly what the problem was. What you see here is the header that was on the engine, both the old engine and the new engine, and this is what is responsible for 90% of sound. As most of you guys already know, on any car, the exhaust plays a huge role in sound. The size, the shape, muffler versus no muffler. But a header or a turbo manifold plays a big role in the pitch of that sound with the lengths of the runners and how they merge. There's an incredible amount of labor hours that go into building a header like this. So as you can imagine, when we were having nonstop issues with oil pressure and other random things going wrong, there wasn't sufficient time to rebuild the header. Well, fast forward to now, it's the off season. We've got an engine now that has literally been so reliable, I hot lapped it until it melted the seam sealer off of my chassis.
My smoke, yeah, I'm fire.
Oof, that's not gonna be fun to deal with.
And now we're gonna take a deep dive into not only achieving that high-pitched sound that we're after, but also optimizing power, which leaves a lot to be learned, and you guys are gonna learn with us. Now, the biggest problem in the rotary world is there's a lot of gatekeeping of information. So when we built this header, we kind of went off what we thought and guidance from people that hadn't really done it before. Now, pretty much no one wanted to share their header design with us unless we ordered an entire engine from them. However, in the past year or two, I've made friends with a lot of people in the rotary community. Logan from Define Autoworks gave me a few tips, and he has an incredible four-rotor car that arguably makes the most power on YouTube. And David from Mazai Formula, who also has some pretty incredible rotary builds, pointed me to some 787B engineering papers that caused things to escalate pretty quickly. Now, in those papers, it doesn't go into as much detail on the exhaust header as I would have liked, but it does go into great lengths about the telescopic throttle bodies that the 787B had. If you're not familiar with it, they basically had trumpets that could slide inward and outward, and that would move the power band either to have more mid-range or more top end. It's very cool, and it's something we always talked about trying to implement on this build. It's not rocket science that with most NA engines, when you have a longer throttle or a longer intake runner, you make more torque because it generates velocity going into the port. But at higher RPM, you want less restriction, so usually a shorter runner length will give you more of that peak power. But in this document, they actually shared the different lengths that were used to achieve different peak torque. And looking at that information, it pointed towards us having way too long of intake runners, which is something we never really considered. So before we start messing with this mess of spaghetti, we're gonna work on the intake and see if any power can be found there, using the old header as a control, so when we start making changes, we're not throwing too many variables in the mix. This gives you an idea of our existing intake setup, which actually measures out to be about 24 inches from the tip of the trumpet to the face of the rotor. And according to the engineering documents, this would be optimal for achieving a peak torque of around 5,500 RPM. Where the rest of the components on this engine are targeted for a much higher RPM, so we said, let's shorten it as much as we possibly can, which resulted in Johan fabricating this masterpiece, which not only allows us to achieve the shortest length they ever used on the 787B, but it leaves room if we were ever able to develop a telescopic throttle system. We can get the additional length now out of the trumpets instead of having to constantly change the entire intake runner. So let's get this thing on and go see what kind of changes it makes on the dyno. When we're competing at the racetrack, it can get chaotic, especially especially when stuff goes wrong. But as the driver, it's our job to remain calm. If any of you guys are in e-commerce, specifically in order fulfillment, you know that that's its own special type of chaos. And with the sponsor of today's video, ShipStation, you can count on your day-to-day remaining calm. There's a lot of benefits of ShipStation, like automating shipping tasks, having a beautiful dashboard where you can manage everything, and being able to print labels with the click of one button. But what really seals the deal is that you get to take advantage of their industry-leading discounts, save a bunch of money and time that you can funnel into scaling your business. You never need to upgrade because ShipStation grows with your business no matter how big it gets. And when we're talking discounts, we're talking up to 88% off UPS, DHL Express, and USPS rates, and up to 90% off of FedEx rates. Calm the chaos of order fulfillment with shipping software that delivers. Switch to ShipStation today and just go to shipstation.com/AdamLZ to get your free 60-day trial. That's just shipstation.com/AdamLZ, and I want to give a massive thank you to ShipStation for sponsoring this video.
Just do a reverse burnout?
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I just freaked the out of Hunter out. I think he thought I was gonna hit him. Isn't to drive the car with the old header and new intake combo, but we want to see what difference the intake made without having a new header into the equation. So we're about to do a couple test pulls with the very short intake runners to see, is it going to pick up power? I think it's going to. I'm crossing my fingers that this will have a bigger gain than the header even would have, and maybe we'll crack 500. Freddie, what's your bet? What do you think is going to happen?
This morning I said 500, but it was like 40 degrees out.
Uh-huh.
Now it's like, what, 65 or so?
Yeah, but the dyno takes into consideration for weather.
Yeah, but it's NA motor. I think it'll make peak of like 480, but probably lose a solid 50 under 5,000.
Interesting. So I mean, before you can kind of see the shape of the graph, and we'll see how that changes now that we've got the short runners. Johan, what do you think's gonna happen?
We'll gain 20 horsepower.
20 horsepower?
I think so.
So it made, what was it, 450 before?
Yeah.
So me and Freddie bet 50, you bet 20. Whoever's the closest, free lunch.
Who's paying?
I don't know, probably me.
Wait,
Wait, but what if I win? Then what happens?
We pay for lunch.
Oh, all right. I like how that works. I think Johan's got good odds. We're just being optimistic.
It's been a while since we've had a Jolly Gator trip.
Dude,
I mean, I wanted to make 500, but I don't know how we're gonna gain 50 horsepower from.
on paper, our other intake was designed for really, really low RPM, and this engine's designed for really high RPM, so hopefully it likes the shorter intake. It was rich. You can see in the power that it dipped down, but usually when it's rich, that means that the engine is consuming less air and there's still more fuel left over, therefore it's making less power. However, you can see up top at the really high RPM areas where torque starts taking over and holding a little bit better than it did before. So as suspected, this might be a little bit too short, but that's why we built it with room to extend if we need to bring this peak torque and move it around. Welcome to the point in the video where I selfishly promote my own brand to try to get you to support the channel. Today we have our brand new long sleeve racing jerseys. We have this clean design, and then we also have this one that is based on the US E36 as the team shirt with all the logos. Our short sleeve jersey sold out, and I predict the same thing will happen with these. So if you want to scoop one, scoop one. Honestly, the reason why these came later in the season, we made these from full scratch. We'd measured everything, probably had a dozen samples to get them to this point. They turned out rad, but full disclaimer, order a size up. I usually wear a large, I'm 6'1". I'm wearing an XL, and that seems to give me the fit that I like for a jersey like this. And the beauty of it is that every $5 you spend on my site, lzmfg.com, is also gonna get you in for a chance to win my yellow Evo. Support the team and get a chance to change your life too. According to the 787B papers, it said that with our intake length, with these runners, our peak torque should have been very, very low. But in reality, with that setup, our peak torque was at about 8,000 RPM. So it makes sense that when we shortened the runners, we moved where I wanted to make peak torque over drastically, but I think it was way too far. The fact that we're still going up at 10,000 RPM maybe would work if it was a drag motor or a circuit motor, but in drifting, this thing's gonna live up in that peak torque area, which I think is better to have at 8,000 RPM just for the longevity of bearings, coolant temperature, exhaust temperature. But it is interesting how it took this shape where it has this divot and it basically shifted it this way where now we have the divot here, which I believe is actually caused by the resonance of what's going on with the waves entering into the intake. But what's cool is now we have two data points from both the short intake runner setup and the long intake runner setup. So we can experiment between the two or rock the short one and put really long trumpets on them and maybe 3D print some different examples. But most importantly, we have our control with the old header. So now we can work on the new header, achieve that sound without throwing two variables at the car at once. Because if we wouldn't have put that intake on with the new headers, we might have thought that the headers is what caused the power band to shift when that really wasn't the case. Even though we had the support of Vibrant Performance with something as complicated as a 4-rotor header, we didn't want to just guess and check when building the next version. So my close friend Matt the Ginge, who you guys know as my spotter, came by to not only scan the old headers to take measurements, but also scan the entire car so we could conceptualize and build out the next system in CAD. With the 3D scan of our old header, Ginge was able to take measurements inside of the software to confirm our suspicions that our runners were not equal length, which is probably the reason why we didn't have that traditional 4-rotor sound. We had nearly a 7-inch variance between the shortest and the longest runner, which is a pretty big deal when the overall length was around 40 inches. Since the header was now off the car, Johan was actually able to go in and to confirm what we found in CAD with the runner lengths being different using a water displacement method where he would fill up each runner with water to see if they were indeed different lengths or not. Because with all those bends, it gets very challenging to measure. You can't just use measuring tape for something like that. Now, using 3D modeling, Ginge played around with different bends, different shapes, different diameters, and even created a simulation to be able to figure out what would theoretically make the most power. He ultimately came up with this header design that was based around the radius bends that we had from Vibrant in the diameter that we were going after. I know he spent a lot of time trying to minimize bends and having straight sections just to keep the exhaust gases happy as they were rushing out of the engine and into the collector. Before building an entirely new header from scratch, which would take many days, we wanted to confirm that the equal length theory is the actual sound that we are after. So Johan decided to take a stab at modifying our old header to have equal length runners because some of the cars that have the high pitched sound that we are after had very interesting design that didn't look equal length. And we wanted to see if the sound is more a factor of those lengths or if it has to do with the bends that are going on the runners. I've said it many times before, but we are unbelievably grateful to have the support of Vibrant Performance. Not only does having the best fabrication materials make it easy for Johan to be a master of his craft, it also allows us to continue experimenting, learning, and share with you guys what works best so everybody wins.
We're chasing sound. I think
Right.
that's what our goal is.
It doesn't have the 787B high tone
Right.
that we want.
Not at all. The easiest thing to do right now is to modify this header, unfortunately. It's done its job, it's proven itself. I'm pretty stoked and proud that it withstand the abuse that it did.
Oh yeah.
All the heat cycle, the fire, like some of the areas this is 304 stainless, so the nickel content is pretty low. You could go to a higher grade stainless and avoid these issues where once the nickel starts to, like, in easy terms, come off, you're gonna start seeing corrosion and rust or stuff like that.
Yeah.
That's just the amount of heat that is going into this thing. Apart from that, it's held up, the welds haven't cracked. Number 3 looks like it's gotta be standard, but once we modify 1 and then 2, we could do 3. So it's like work our way down. So once we modify 1, we could play with number 2 and get it away, you know, go down, because we have to keep in mind that we have our intake, which I try to make it as equal length as I could. I thought I was closer than this, but now with this one, we could play with that, give ourselves a little more clearance on the frame rail, and hopefully we get that sound that we're chasing for. See, so like if these were individually flanges, which the original plan was to do individual flanges on the housings, literally I could just remove each runner like that.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna cut it here and then put it back in place and then start like playing with lengths, see what is the shortest way I could get. This piece that I cut off is 25 inches long, measuring the center of the radius. I measured the difference to match this number 4, so I gotta take away the new tube from here to there. It has to be 3 inches and a quarter shorter. I just gotta be mindful everything I cut to kind of add to that.
How you doing, bud?
Now you say that again and point the camera with those places.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you did my job. First thing, so technically speaking, they're not equal length, but this is off by a quarter inch, 1/8 inch to a quarter inch. This one was the most drastic one that we had to change. Number 2 as well. Number 2 was the longest. The only downside that I ran into was when I first mocked up the front 2 after I modified number 1. It was touching on the frame rail. Given the hard time I had remaking number 1, I didn't want to redo anything and start over. And for how much clearance I needed, I'll cut the subframe, which is braced inside, and it only needed a little bit. Once you cut it and you look inside, you can see the reinforcements of the subframe. So I left it alone in my car. It'll be fine.
Plenty strong.
Yeah, when I modified number 3, I knew it was going to be sitting closer to intake runner number 2. I just wanted to make sure that I was not going to be touching. So now what I'm mucking up, I just grabbed a piece of scrap metal and took a couple of angle measurements in that area so that I could muck up a heat shield that would pretty much protect the intake from the heat of the header, especially now that it's closer. But yeah, we'll put that reflective tape on this. So it helps with heat. I did put the gold tape on the frame rail, and when the car came back from Polcat and caught fire, I took all that tape off. And behind the tape, it was like nothing happened, but around it, you could tell it was the car was on fire.
So it actually does something.
Yes, it definitely does, and we'll add that tape as well. So yeah.
Johan gets to have fun welding all the runners. We're gonna take a stab at this mess under here. So we did repaint the engine bay, but because everything was still in the car, we didn't really address all of this crap. It's oil-soaked soot that could potentially catch on fire again. So we're gonna try to scrape it off and then I'll put like a thin coat of paint or something. The problem is it was just getting so hot that it was literally catching the seam sealer on fire. In a perfect world, we would have started with the chassis and gotten rid of all that first, but I don't think we expected the EGTs to get as hot as they did, because usually rotaries don't even last that long, you know? using the torch, you can kind of see what areas are more prone to catch fire, like this. I've all kind of gotten rid of all the sound deadening, so you see like nothing's really doing anything. Then where there still is sound deadening, you see how it's like flame? Yeah. So you know like, okay, let's probably take some more off of that. But the header primarily is like in this region. So as long as we don't see too many glowing things like this, there's not a big chance of it catching fire again. Right. Now that we've got the modified existing header with equal lengths ready to go in the car, I should probably mention that this isn't only for sound. By having equal length runners, you also optimize the scavenging that's going on inside of the engine, which should make more power. And the simplest way to explain this is when they're not equal length, you have pulses that are entering the collector at the same time instead of being equally spaced out, which reduces the scavenging effect of that exhaust pulse pulling air into the intake port in the engine. So by having them equally spaced out with equal length runners, theoretically it should pull more air into the engine and we should see more power as a result on the dyno. It's almost that time that me and Johan are so eagerly waiting for. We're about to hear this thing.
Yeah, it better sound different.
I know, right?
I wouldn't do a whole new header. I want to hear it because it's never sound like a typical full rotor, completely different if it does sound right.
Not only could it have that higher pitched noise, but I'm wondering if we'll also get the equal lopes at idle that you usually hear, the bop, 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 bop. But maybe because our lengths were a little off is why that was getting more like bop, 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 bop. So we'll see if it does that too. But yeah, she's all together, ready to fire up. We'll see how it runs. Might need to make some small corrections for idle, but then we can throw it on the dyno, just fueling and see what happens. You'll notice we learned our lesson a long time ago about running this car in the shop. It literally covers every single car within the entire shop with a film of oil. So that's why you always see us rolling it by the door, even when we started after doing some mods, just to let all the rotary smoke go outside. Hard to like fully tell right now. It's seeming like the car wants a lot more fuel, which is a good sign because that means we're getting that scavenging effect, which means it should make more power. But I'd rather just adjust everything in the dyno. It's a little bit easier than just trying to free rev because so much happens and it's so quick. Then I'm gonna put it on the dyno, run it through, and then we'll be able to hear what this thing sounds like at higher RPM, but it's seeming like it's a little bit higher pitched already. I have enough seat time on this car to actually feel pretty comfortable running it on the dyno and making adjustments. But for whatever reason, no matter what I do, it keeps breaking up, which tells me we might have a bad plug situation. I can add a lot of fuel, I can take a lot of fuel out, and it's still having the same breakup in the same area. So maybe just it's time for a plug change. We're gonna swap them and see if that helps.
How are the plugs looking, Doctor?
Doctor, they look normal.
Yeah.
Look identical, so I mean that's good. But I think Adam might have found something, so we'll find out. But the plugs look good. It's rare when we switch plugs on this car, and with the R35 coils, you know, it's not a common issue, but.
full pull, we were actually having issues because we had an injector unplugged. But first full pull, and we had massive gains. The fueling's not even close to right. Look at the massive mid-range gains there. Cracked 300 foot-pounds of torque, which is the most torque this thing's ever made. So I think we're onto a really good path right now. I did the purple one after the white one. Look.
You did a thing. Look at that.
I made a change and it made more power and it got rid of the little dip. Look at me go. I'm so proud of myself.
Freddie who?
Yeah, you can see it. Really like the timing. I put 1 degree in it and it picked up almost 20 horsepower up top.
Yeah.
So I'm going to put another degree in it and see what happens just where it likes it. One thing I've learned, not the ideal environment for a dyno. We don't have a pass-through window, so we're not able to have good air circulation in here. The dirty air and the exhaust gases get mixed in. Cars tend to lose power because of that. So I let it sit for a while. I'm gonna try adding a degree of timing. Fingers crossed, we could crack 500. I'd be really happy, even though it's just a dyno number. Mike still hasn't vaped, so congratulate him in the description. Yeah. On one hand, I'm going to say we didn't meet our objective, and that was to make this thing sound like a 787B. I think there's something else that gives it that high-pitched noise. I don't know if it has to do with the bends coming off the header or possibly the location of the collector. I do know, getting into the real deep dive of physics, there's something called a first, a second, and a third order harmonic that have to do with where you place the collector. Maybe that's where our sound is, but the good thing is, to our surprise, there's actually a huge performance gain of doing the equal length. So much so that it actually got rid of this dip that was maybe caused by oscillations before and took our peak power not only from 450 to 483 horsepower, but it also makes all that power sooner. What that means for drifting, torque is everything, and I think we went from like 280 foot-pounds to 320 foot-pounds. That torque is gonna be massive. Not having this dip is gonna make the car feel so much smoother. But full disclaimer, this is an LZ tune. I think there might even be more left in it once Freddie's available and he can spend some time on it. What we're actually going to do is put individual wide bands in all of the different runners. That way we can trim the rotors, make sure fueling is good on all of them, and we suspect that this rollover up top might have something to do with our trigger system on the car, so we're gonna upgrade that. The next iteration of this car won't be as long or as in-depth of a video like this was, but we're gonna continue to mess with it. We'll bring you guys along for the journey. I love this because there's so much to learn. Even though it's a weird engine, we can apply a lot of the things that we're finding out with this onto the other builds. The guys say it sounds slightly different, but I feel like the best way to really tell is to go and drive it. So of course, to end the video, we'll go try the new setup. I'll let you guys know if I can actually feel a difference with this. But either way, I'm stoked. We did something and it made a positive change, and I'm left with a better car. sound different?
Yes.
It did?
Yes.
I felt like in the car it sounded a little bit more high pitch. It's definitely not the 787B sound. It's definitely not the same as like James Dean's 4-rotor. It absolutely feels a lot smoother power band wise. I feel like it's so hard to tell with drifting the extra whatever 40 horsepower, but not having that dip is huge.
Yeah.
Because before I used to come down this straight and you would feel it kind of go like, almost like it had VTEC. Now it's just like flat the whole time.
That's sick.
I definitely thought I was going into the trees on that one time, bro. I was cooking. Well, he had the K truck there, and I was like, oh, I can make it around that. But it had me go deep. This car is like, I've heard not so great things about the Supra and like really high level competition, like FD, like you can't get enough grip out of the rear end. I love the way this car drives so much though. I can hop in this car after not driving it forever and go throw it around, and it just like does what I want. It's sick. So again, you know, to sum it up, we didn't achieve what we were out to do with the sound, and we still have stuff that we can try with it. But a byproduct of it was making a lot more power and making an even better version of the same car. So the saga of experimentation with the 4-rotor is definitely not done, but one more check mark and a lot learned.
When you say